All right. So we're just going to do short lecture on institutions just to try to hit home what exactly we mean by an institution within the context of this class and within the context of just economics in general. Okay, so just for an example, like let's go back in time to like the primitive agriculture days, and different societies have different ways that they use to farm the land, and these would be an example of an institution. As a society, we are adopting this institution, and that's going to lead to a set of incentives that will ultimately, shape growth potentially, or other types of outcomes. So, for instance, if we're thinking about farming, in the past, some societies had forced labor of some kind. You have slavery in the U.S. South, obviously, and in the Caribbean, and then in Brazil as well. Even before that, you have some form of forced labor with the Incans. Of course, there would be, you could look at like the large scale farms under Mao as a form of in China as a form of forced labor, or similar thing under Pol Pot in Cambodia. That's one type, brutal type, but many societies in the past adopted this type of institution. Sharecropping, which would also kind of look a little bit like feudalism. You could do communal farming, where hey, all the land is owned in common, and we make decisions together. Or you could have private property, as is most common in the present, where somebody owns the land, they make the decisions about what's going to happen on this land in terms of agricultural production. And all of these are all different types of institutions that a society could adopt with respect to farming. All right, back to this graph. We just throw this graph in here every lecture, just because it's really the best graph, or it's really, I don't know, the theme of the class. Okay. So again, industrial revolution, always going to come back to the industrial revolution. Just to remind you, it's really where we get the first sustained economic growth in history. This transition from that agrarian craft-based economy to what looks like a modern economy. And as a reminder, we in this class we're going to really take seriously the role of institutions. We like I said, it's not going to be monocausal, meaning it's not going to be just institutions. Of course, we have our geography and our cultural explanations as well, and as I said, it's probably a combination of the three. But the one we're going to focus on is institutions, and we're going to give it primacy. We're going to say, at least in this class, my reading of the literature, coming with my biases, but my reading of the research, my reading of the literature, this is for me the most plausible explanation. Although Joel Mokyr has a new book out that I do need to check out. All right, so really, what we're going to say is there's a transformation in English institutions, and they really, for the first time, adopt what we would looks like a market economy, sometimes called capitalism. Um, Capitalism has some negative connotations in the present, so I prefer to use the term market economy, um, which you could just think of like a free market, or a voluntary, maybe a voluntary economy is a better word for it. Okay, so again, what do we mean by these institutions? So one useful way to frame it is kind of laying these things on top of each other. And ultimately, when we get to this system, we'll call this the capitalist economic system, or as I mentioned, the market economy, or the voluntary economy. So initially, we're going to need private property. That's like the first step, is we need private property. The property is owned by individuals or households. This is just a starting point. You need this in order to have exchange, or also innovation. You need people to invest in their property in order to get that growth. Okay, then you need markets. So if I produce something, I need somewhere to exchange it. If I have specialization, well, I need to trade for the other goods. If I'm specializing in the producing of corn, I just don't want to eat corn all the time. I want to trade that corn for something else. So I need some sort of markets. So I need to layer markets on top of this private property to get that exchange. And then final step, if I add firms, then we'll have basically a functioning market economy. Firms will kind of organize the production process. So a firm, basically takes inputs, turns them into outputs that are really oftentimes the hubs of innovation. And so in this final step, once we add the firms into it and the institutions that facilitate firm formation, we will get kind of our modern economic system, or the market economy or the capitalist economy. Okay, so we need private property. We need the institutions that allow for markets to, in this just general markets, places where people can exchange goods and services. And then finally, the institutions that will allow us to form firms. Okay. And so let's go over each of these. For the property rights, you need property to be privately held. You need a legal system to make sure that that property can't be taken away. And we need the equal protection of that property in the eyes of the law. So the powerful cannot expropriate the less powerful. So that's what we mean by functioning property rights. This is an ideal. So, not necessarily any society will reach this ideal where, it's perfect equal protection. One of the podcasts talks about how, the institutions may be strong for one group, but may not be applied to another group. There's a podcast this week that touches on that, and that actually may explain growth differences between groups in terms of economic success. Okay, but this is the ideal. We get the private property, the legal system enforces it, and nobody can just take anybody else's property willy-nilly. Okay, that's the step one. So the markets. So we need we need open access to markets for buyers and sellers. So we need both, large number of buyers, large number of sellers, and nobody's able to keep one another out. So if I'm a seller, I can't keep my competition out. Hold on, being interrupted by a child. Dean, say hello. Dean. I need to oh, I'm gonna pause the video. Okay, we're back. Where were we? Talking about markets. All right, markets are these places where people can gather, exchange goods and services for money or just for each other. Institutions, as I mentioned, we need people to be able to access these markets. Okay, and so that means sometimes physical access, but in the present, what it really means is like setting up your company and being able to, regulation not being in the way, bureaucracy not being in the way, so you can, you can freely operate. And then you need some protections so that, if there's contracts, they're honored, or if the sellers are saying something is, like if they're saying it's one thing, but it turns out to be another thing, there needs to be some sort of enforcement on that. Okay, and lastly, firms, all right, they're like a special type of organization, really, because what's nice about them is they can quickly spring up, and ideally they can quickly spring up to fill a need or produce a product, and then they can go away once it's no longer needed. And this really facilitates that innovation. And so you need some sort of banking system, access to capital. Usually you need some capital to start a firm, and private property on both the inputs. So I'm buying the raw materials and then the outputs. And then finally, this is really important. You need rewards, and risks must be realized. So look, if you're a good firm and you're operating well, profits need to be there, and you need to be able to, make money. But also, if you are inefficient or not producing well, or, ripping off your customers, you need to go out of business. You need to not be protected by the government. If you are in some way bailed out or something like that, that would not be a functioning market in the, traditional sense. Okay, so that's one way to think about a market economy, the different things you need for a market economy, and the institutions needed for each of those pieces. And if you have those, that would presumably lead to innovation. Other important institutions kind of outside this system is you need some sort of human capital generating institutions. Typically these are schools, but they could be like other things, like, even like YouTube now, where you can learn things, or, other forms of ways for people to get the skills that they need. And then we need also to protect some sort of intellectual property rights. So not just physical property rights, but intellectual property rights. Okay. So just to bring this all together, if you have institutions that lay the groundwork for a market economy where a firm can sell a product or improved product, a new product, an invention, or an improved product, an innovation. um, then society will have economic growth because essentially you have the underlying institutional structure to facilitate and reward people for inventing and innovating. Another way to think about it is to just think about it from an entrepreneur who is setting up a firm for the first time. What are the institutions needed there for each of the steps? Well, you need the idea. So you need that human capital. You need that institution that provides that human capital generating institution, some sort of educational system. You need to know your idea cannot be stolen and what you produce cannot be stolen. So this is intellectual and physical property rights. You need to raise money. So you need some sort of functioning capital markets, like ways to get money. You need to hire workers. So you need a population that has high human capital, you need skilled workers, and you need that contract enforcement to make sure these kind of deals will be honored. And then finally, you need that access to the market that we talked about in the market section. You need to be able to enter the market freely. So there's like two different ways of thinking about how this works and the institutions needed for each of these steps. You can think about the different pieces needed for a market economy, or you can think about it from somebody who's starting a firm. If you notice, it's all the same institutions. We're talking about property rights, we're talking about human capital, we're talking about market access. Principally, are going to be the really really crucial ones. Okay, and so so it seems easy. You're sitting there, okay. So if you want to have a rich country, it seems pretty easy. Just get these institutions. Well, it's really hard to change institutions and adopt these institutions because think about what these institutions mean. What's going to happen is if you have these, you're going to get innovation and you're going to get invention. That innovation and invention is going to displace the existing economic elite usually. So usually the elites in the country, they're like, the people who own these like large monopolistic firms. Why would they want to put in good institutions that allow for competition to flourish? Your political elite are usually intertwined with these economic elites. Again, would they want to put in institutions that may unseat them? Because once you get this going, you're going to have a very dynamic economy where the things can be disruptive. New firms can come in and displace old ones. So oftentimes, the existing powers, have a lot to lose by adopting these institutions. Okay, and so that's what happens. So, and uh, as I was saying down here, um, it's really hard to change these because of the vested interests. And then even if you do get that growth, you may have instability because of the people who lose out from innovation. They may not be happy with that. And so you also kind of need a set of institutions to take care of those who are displaced by the growth that is caused when you adopt these institutions, like some sort of redistribution usually is needed. Okay, all right. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of the institutional framework that is needed for a market economy and how that market economy drives growth. All right.